Are you confused by the topic of effort, making effort in Buddhist practice? That's what we're going to discuss in today's video. Oftentimes I think you'll hear people talk of the concept of no effort or non-effort. In Zen meditation, for example, you may hear someone saying that effort is the problem, that we have to overcome the whole idea of making effort. And the famous Mahayana Heart Sutra tells us that there's nothing to be gained. There's no such thing as ignorance. There's no such thing as wisdom. This all implies that effort is somehow wholly misattributed, that we shouldn't make effort. Effort itself is the problem. And yet, the Eightfold Path, some of us will know, is sort of the central aspect of Buddhist Dharma, and right effort is a key part of the Eightfold Path. So what are we to make of this situation? It can be very confusing. And part of why I started this channel was to try to clear up confusions like this, where we see different claims being made at different times in Buddhism, in the Buddhist Dharma. And indeed, this is an example of the way that all things change. The way the Buddhist Dharma was taught changed over the years. There's been a change in how we teach the Buddhist practice. Now, this is a deep issue, and I can only really scratch the surface here, but what I want to do is to begin with the history of early Buddhism. What do we find in the early texts? I'll sketch the picture we find there, and then turn to some of the later ideas and how they may have developed. The picture that we get in the early Dharma is that effort is in the forefront. The Buddha himself came from a noble lineage, a lineage of noblemen, of the warrior caste, and as such, he seems to have been somebody who held effort in high regard. It's said in one of the most earliest descriptions of the Buddha's search for enlightenment, that when he found a place suitable for him, he says, "This is good enough for striving." It is often said that the Buddha made a vow not to rise from his seat until he had attained final awakening or enlightenment. Here is one description we find of the Buddha's striving for enlightenment in the early texts. "Mendicants, I've learned these two things for myself, to never be content with skillful qualities and to never stop trying. I never stopped trying, thinking, gladly let only skin, sinews, and bones remain. Let the flesh and blood waste away in my body. I will not stop trying until I have achieved what is possible by human strength, energy, and vigor. It was by diligence that I achieved awakening, and by diligence that I achieved the supreme sanctuary from the yoke." And in a different early sutta, when the Buddha was asked what kind of person would beautify the grove of trees in which the Buddha sat with his Sangha, the Buddha said, "It's a mendicant who, after the meal, returns from alms round, sits down cross-legged, sets their body straight, and establishes mindfulness in front of them, thinking, 'I will not break this sitting posture until my mind is freed from the defilements by not grasping.' That's the kind of mendicant who would beautify this park." In other words, the Buddha here is lauding, is praising that person, that mendicant, who really makes an effort and strives. In other places in the suttas, the Buddha talks about practicing as though our head were on fire. If our head were on fire, we'd be making every possible effort to try to extinguish that fire, and that we should be practicing with the same kind of diligence. He says this is a practice that he describes this way: a practice with intense enthusiasm, effort, zeal, vigor, perseverance, mindfulness, and clear comprehension. So the picture we get in the early tradition is one where right effort, where true effort is really at the forefront. Now, of course, these are mostly talks given to monastics, and so the effort was to be made by monastics rather than lay people, but nevertheless, effort is at the forefront. However, there are, of course, downsides to making intense effort. This can lead to a kind of an ego striving, what we term nowadays efforting. Efforting is a kind of an ego-centered striving where we put ourselves perhaps over other people. We become conceited perhaps with our intense effort, and we compare ourselves to other people. And these are ways in which effort can get in the way of actually making progress. It can also, strong effort can also lead to increased stress. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to us deciding that the path isn't right for us. So we have to be careful. Now, in the history of Buddhism, once the Buddha passed away, what we find is an increasing kind of hagiography around the Buddha, an increasing sense of the grandeur and grandiosity of the Buddha's achievement. And in so telling, and in the retelling, there grew up a growing difference, a growing spread between the apparently human kinds of things that we can achieve and the apparently supernatural or superhuman things that the Buddha achieved. There became a growing difference and separation between ordinary enlightenment, or what we might term arhatship, and full Buddhahood, becoming a Buddha. On the one hand, it seemed like normal human effort simply was not capable of leading us to that end of full Buddhahood. It just seemed too far away. However, at the same time as we saw this growing separation between mere enlightenment or ordinary enlightenment and Buddhahood, we also saw the growing up of this idea of what's known as Buddha nature. This idea that all of us are inherently Buddhas. Now, once again, the topic of Buddha nature is an enormous topic and one that I can't fully explore in this video, but what it signified here is a paradoxical collapse of the distance between our own attainments and the attainments of a full Buddha. Because just as it may have seemed before, the way I was describing it before, that there was an immense distance, with this notion of Buddha nature, that distance once again collapsed, where it's seen or claimed that we ourselves are inherently Buddhas, we've always been Buddhas, and so the whole idea of striving sort of is mislaid. It doesn't exist here anymore. It doesn't apply in the case of becoming a full Buddha, because there's no point to striving. We already are Buddhas. And so the point is not to make an effort to become something that we're not, but rather simply to realize what we already are. So again, this later Mahayana tradition seems to de-emphasize the role of effort in our practice. Either that effort would have to be too great because full Buddhahood is just too far away from where we are, or more commonly, that effort is simply misplaced or in the wrong, it doesn't help us because we are already Buddhas, and so making any kind of an effort would simply take us away from what we already are doing right here and right now, if we could only see it. Now, confusion can arise for us if we blend and mix up these two ways of interpreting the Dharma. One from the early tradition that sees effort as important and indeed necessary in our practice, and the other from the later tradition that sees effort as essentially misplaced, that any effort we make is sort of taking us away from the goal, which is simply to see what's already true. But I think once we learn about this historical development, we can begin to see a way through here. We can begin to see a way to sort of bring these two ways of understanding the Dharma together, in a sense. Because even non-effort, even this idea of non-effort, is a kind of effort in its own way. It's what I would consider a skillful reframing, a skillful means of reframing the whole idea of Buddhist practice. Because even non-effort, even non-striving, is effort, is striving in its own way. Here's the way that a contemporary Zen teacher has described the process. He's talking about meditation here. He says, "Effortful meditation is putting a lot of energy into keeping your focus on one spot, getting frustrated with yourself when you wander from that, sweating bullets as you try to do it right. Non-effort meditation is sitting in a relaxed way, paying attention to what's happening in the moment, noticing when your attention wanders to thoughts, noticing the thoughts for a moment with the curiosity of watching a cloud float by, but then returning easily to the present moment. It's not zero effort, but it's much more effortless. So this Zen meditation teacher describes the whole process of non-effort not as zero effort, he says, but as more effortless. That we aren't sweating bullets, as he put it, but rather simply focusing, in this particular case, on the present moment. We're doing a mindfulness meditation here, or perhaps we're doing some kind of Zen meditation here. The Buddha himself in the early texts gives a very famous simile of the lute, a lute player. And he gives this simile to a particular person who he thinks is over-practicing, over-efforting in his practice, and as a result of trying too hard, he's getting in his own way and unable to attain enlightenment. And the Buddha tells this person, he says basically that correct effort is like correctly playing a lute, or correctly tuning that lute. That if you tune it too tightly, you can't play the strings well, you can't play the notes, and if you tune it too loosely, of course, it won't play anything. So you have to find that middle ground, that middle way of effort. And I think this Zen meditation teacher is making exactly the same point. That in fact this pathway of no effort or non-effort isn't really no effort at all, but rather a skillful reframing of the idea of effort to make the process more fluid for us. Because the fact is, once you actually get into meditation, even Zen meditation, you find that non-effort isn't easy. It actually isn't easy to make no effort in the way that the Zen masters want us to. It may be that we are all inherently Buddhas in some sense, but if that's really true, it certainly is not something that's easy to see. At the end of the day, I think these are two ways we find in the early texts and the later text, two different ways of framing practice. And I think which one is right for us depends upon our internal makeup, if you like, the way that we approach the world. If we tend to be very wound up and striving, if that's the sort of person that we are, then a path of non-effort, a path which gives up the idea of effort, is one that we may find more congenial, more helpful to us. If, on the other hand, we tend to find ourselves being more lazy, less willing to put in the effort, then the early path, one that highlights effort and points out its essential nature to the path, may instead be more useful to us, because it will give us more of an impetus to put in the striving, the effort that we need to. Now, a similar topic that we find in Zen meditation and Zen practice is this notion of the beginner's mind, of coming to all of our practice, in a sense, without preconceptions. And I did another video on that, which may be interesting to you if you're interested in that kind of Zen outlook. And I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen if you haven't seen it or would like to see it again. Thanks so much for watching. If you're getting something out of these videos, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked here on the screen and down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that we're all doing here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.